If you've ever considered leasing a new Rivian, this video is for you. We're going to talk all the specifics from the calculator online to the process to everything you need to know to be well informed going into your brand new lease of a Rivian. Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. I know it's been a moment since we last spoke. I took a little bit of a brief hiatus, got busy with some stuff, but now we're back with another video, which is a topic, in all honesty, I've been wanting to make for probably about a year now, but things kept getting in the way. I got some press cars in, I got busy with other videos, other stuff outside of YouTube, and well, here we are. Better late than never, but I still think it's an important topic to discuss because it helps the potential buyer to really understand the leasing process because it's not super transparent on Rivian's website. If you guys are new to the channel, this is Backseat Driver. I do primarily car reviews and definitely car related content. Today we're focusing on my personal vehicle, which is the Rivian R1T. To be specific, it's a 2023 Rivian R1T quad motor with the large battery pack and the all-terrain package. It's kind of a mouthful, but I talk about that because that's going to factor, of course, into the MSRP and the deal that I got. Now, this video starts from pretty much the day that I put my order or reservation in on Rivian's website. If you guys are interested in how I found this particular vehicle, which was not in my home state of Utah, I made a video about that about a year ago at this point where I talked about that process. So this video starts from the day that I put that reservation in to pretty much delivery day and all the fees and all the documentation that went in during that process. So I put my reservation in and it took about 3 days for the person, the sales advisor, to reach out to me and confirm some logistics and make sure I'm moving forward with this vehicle. Now those were a tough 3 days because I had some pretty important questions I wanted them to answer, and unfortunately I just had to kind of wait for them to call me. There's really no other option. I mean, I tried calling Rivian to get a hold of somebody before I put the reservation in. It was a, give it a few business days, they'll give you a call back. I didn't really have that luxury because I wanted to make sure this particular vehicle was already reserved. Otherwise, I knew it wasn't going to last a few days. Anyways, that third day after I put the reservation in, they called me and I had a few questions, 3 main questions. The first was, can they ship the vehicle to a different service center? Now, for some background here, if you guys aren't as familiar with the channel and this vehicle, I found this vehicle in Denver, Colorado. I am a resident of Utah. So, quite a bit of a distance. So for me, it was less than ideal to have to fly out to Colorado to drive this car back home. It would have been a lot easier for me just to have my local service center, have it somehow transported, and then I can go to the local service center and drive it home versus having to drive, upwards of 10 hours. Now, the answer to the first question right out of the gate was no, they can't ship the car to a different service center. It is where it is, and you have to pick it up in person. Now, I had heard stories from my local service center that there were times where it's quarter end or month end, and they're, maybe willing to move some inventory. They would transport the vehicle to another service center, I think for free or maybe a nominal fee, and then, you could go pick it up. But that wasn't the case in July of 2024. The other thing I offered or asked about was, well, can I have a shipping company come and pick up the car and then transport it, like I can give them authorization? They said no, because you have to come and sign certain papers in person, which I thought was odd because it is a digital, direct-to-consumer company. You think everything could be done online. But I also realized sometimes there are state rules that haven't caught up to the direct-to-consumer model, so it may be a state mandate that I have to go out and sign some papers. Anyways, that was my first question. Unfortunately, I couldn't get it where I wanted it to be, which was my local service center. I said, well, what if I, decide to not get this vehicle? How's that deposit? It was a $500 deposit. It's non-refundable, of course, but I wanted to get some more details. And they said, well, we'd be willing to transfer it to a different car that's in your local area, but we can't refund that money, which is understandable. At least they were willing to work with me about getting a different vehicle that I could go pick up that same day. The second and third question were more important to me, which was the money factor and the residual value. Now, if you guys aren't as familiar with leasing, money factor is pretty much just the interest rate. Like you take the money factor, you times it by, I believe, 2,400, you get yourself the interest rate. I don't know why they do that funky formula, but that is what it is. And residual value, of course, is what the value of the car is going to be based on my payments after 3 years. So in 3 years, the residual value is pretty much how much I owe on this car if I want to buy it out or obviously sell it to somebody else. Those two numbers are really important if you guys are a little bit more lease savvy, because that's really what, in my opinion, makes a good or a bad lease. It's not necessarily the monthly payment, although that's definitely a component of it. But those two other two factors, which are kind of related, right? If you have a high interest rate, your residual value is probably going to be a little bit higher. If you have a low interest rate and most of your payments are going towards paying down the car, then your residual value is going to be lower. For me, I prefer to have a low interest rate and a lower residual if possible, so that at the end of the lease term, I can either buy it out and maybe have a little bit of equity in the car, or sell it and have it marketable and not lose any money on it. And of course, having low interest rate is for obvious reasons. You don't want to pay a high interest rate. It's funny, as a little tangent, I did look at a different car during this time period when I was shopping for the Rivian, and it was actually a Hummer EV, believe it or not, which I know it's not for everybody. I actually think it's a pretty cool car. And they had some really attractive incentives, lease incentives, and they still do to this day. But when I started looking further into it and getting the residual value and the money factor, it turned out to not be a good deal. At the end of the 3 years, you would definitely have negative equity, and your really only option is to give it back to the dealership or the manufacturer, in which case you really have kind of just spent that money and you have nothing to show for it. But which, again, to some people, that might be perfectly fine if you're willing to do just a short-term thing. But if you kind of start thinking about, okay, what do I want to do in 3 years and have some options, it's best to have the lowest money factor and lowest residual. Anyways, tangent aside, coming back to my conversation, the individual couldn't tell me the money factor or the residual value until I applied for the loan, which was kind of a few steps down the line. He did say, and I asked, how competitive is the interest rate? Like, I want to know before I get my credit pulled, is this something I really want to pursue? And he did say that the interest rate is pretty competitive. It's a little bit better than financing rates at the time. And I think he said the same about the residual value. Now, I will say I had an idea about what the residual value would be based on another YouTuber's video. I believe his handle is Duke of Manville. I'll put it up on the screen if that's not correct. But Duke of Manville, shout out to him. He did make a video about the leasing process of an R1S. And he kind of told me what the residual value was for, or not me personally, he told the audience that the residual value for his vehicle was going to be, I believe, somewhere around 58% or something. So I had an idea of that in my head, and then I don't remember if he told us the money factor in that video, but he gave me an idea of some of those things that I'm going to be clarifying in this video. So anyways, I had an idea of it, still no concrete answer. Anyways, I decided to continue going through the loan application stage because I really wanted to know these numbers before I 100% wanted to commit buying this car or leasing this vehicle. The portal online, once you kind of give them the green light, the portal online has a lot of steps that you can fill out. In fact, you can fill out those steps the day you put the reservation and the money down. You can start putting that stuff in. I wanted to wait until I spoke with a sales advisor, but you can start that paperwork earlier. It asks you a bunch of yes/no questions if you're doing a trade-in, some of your insurance info, yada, yada, yada. The biggest step is probably the loan application stage, which is where you put in your information, it pulls your credit, it determines if you qualify for the loan. And, of course, since I'm sitting in this car, I did qualify, and it gave me a lot of good info at the summary page once I got the approval. But the one thing that was still missing was the money factor. However, it did give me the residual value, which I have it up here. It's 57.5%. So very close to what the Duke of Manville was seeing on his R1S. But again, no money factor. Of course, it told me my monthly payment, which I'll compare that to the calculator here in just a minute. But I had to call that sales advisor and say, hey, what's my money factor? You told me I'd have it. And he said, oh, it'll be included on your loan documents. I'll try to dig for it, but I don't have it. And then he asked me an odd question as to why I want to know what the money factor is on my lease, which I think is silly. Anybody who gets asked the question, why do you want to know what the interest rate is on your loan? If you put it like that, that's really a stupid question to ask somebody. It's obvious why I want to know what my interest rate is. It's a very loaded question. But anyways, he was able to kind of call me back a few minutes later. He got in touch with the finance person. I don't know, he was giving me kind of a little bit of trouble and hassle to get this money factor, which I think is, honestly, I think there should be a law out there that says you're entitled to know what your interest rate is and your residual value is on any loan, let alone a lease. But my money factor, according to what he told me, was 0.0001. Multiplying that by 2,400, you get 0.024%, which means the interest rate on my lease is 0.024%. Truly a phenomenal number. One of the best money factors I've ever had on any vehicle I've leased. And I've leased quite a few different cars. That is awesome, if it's true. The reason I say if it's true is because I never actually saw that number on my final loan document package. for some reason it was missing. Like there was no section that talked about money factors. Crazy as that sounds, because I've seen it on other loan documents for leases, they didn't have it on there. So I trust them based on my calculation using the monthly payment and the residual value and all that. It checks out that it's a pretty good interest rate. It's definitely not like an 8% rate. Do I know if it's 0.024? I just can't verify that. So take that for what it's worth. Now, I do want to talk about how accurate the calculator is online versus the number it shot out to me once I got the loan approved. So online, it was telling me that with 0% down payment, which as a small caveat, it's never 0% for Rivian. The reason I say that is the non-refundable deposit, that's a down payment. No matter how you look at it, that's money going towards the car at closing. So technically it's a down payment. Technically I did $500 down payment because that was my non-refundable deposit. Now on the calculator, I put 0% down or 0 down, but in reality, it includes that deposit. So before I put in the reservation, I actually wrote down the numbers on the online calculator to compare it to what it would be after I got the loan approved. And with a 0% down payment, $500 non-refundable deposit, a $1,600 acquisition fee, and the first month's payment, my monthly payment would be $760 a month. Now, before I completed the loan application, I did ask the sales advisor, how accurate is that online calculator? And he said it's mostly pretty accurate except for taxes and registration fees and a lot of those things that are really regulated state by state. It's not a blanket across the board, this is the fee. And honestly, I'm kind of sympathetic to Rivian not having that information because it is very nuanced. It really depends on where you live, and we'll talk more about that in the monthly payment. Now, speaking of monthly payment, what was it after I applied for the loan and got approval, which was officially what was written on my documents? So this is where it gets a little bit interesting. The amount due at signing was not very accurate on the calculator. And this is to the point of what the sales advisor was saying. Taxes, closing fees, registration fees, those things are not included in that due at signing. So the due at signing before I went through the loan application process was about $1,655. The due at signing after I went through the loan application process was $2,480. And the difference was primarily taxes and registration fees. So that's about an $800 difference between the two. Now, when we come back to the monthly payment, it was $760 on the calculator before I applied. The actual monthly payment for the car I'm sitting in today is $800.71. That's a difference about $40.71 compared to the numbers that I had before I applied for the loan. Now, what is kind of confusing here and why in some ways the amount I'm paying now is actually better than what the calculator was showing is Utah does leasing taxes a little bit differently than other states. And this is where it gets confusing with leasing and why I don't blame Rivian for not having super accurate numbers. Leasing in a state like Texas, you're gonna pay taxes on the entire cost of the car. Even though you're leasing it for only a portion of it, right? 36 months, that residual value that's left is, you know, the amount that you still owe on the car. You're still paying taxes for the full MSRP. In states like Colorado, you're gonna pay taxes at closing for just your leased portion. So however much your monthly payments are over 36 months or whatever, that's how much you're paying taxes on. In Utah, it's a different way of looking at it, which I think honestly is the better way. Utah takes your monthly payment and it simply adds your sales tax on top of it. So let's say your monthly payment's $1,000 a month. Well, if your taxes in Utah are 10%, then you pay $1,100 a month. Like, it's pretty simple, cut and dry. That's how they calculate it. And so when you start looking at what my local taxes are versus that $760 payment, if you add taxes on top of it, my payment would have actually been over $800 a month. My real payment is like somewhere around $740, and then the taxes are about $60. So in reality, the payment on the calculator before applying for the loan was a worse scenario or a worse number, a higher number than what I'm actually paying if you add taxes into the calculation. However, like I said, the down payment was higher than what the calculator was showing me. So those are two things to keep in mind. Very important things that I wasn't able to really get a good answer on before I went through this process is the calculator is mostly accurate, but it may show a lower due at signing than what you're actually gonna have to pay. Sorry, one thing I realized as I was looking through my notes that I forgot to mention was, because it was a year ago when this all went down, once I put in my reservation and I kind of went into the owner portal where I started filling out the insurance information, the loan application, trade-in, all that stuff, it did shoot out a monthly payment figure that was different than the calculator before I put in my reservation. And that number was, if I remember right, spot on to the $800.71 that was on my approved loan documents. So once you actually pay that non-refundable deposit, you should be able to see the final numbers without having to go through the credit pull process. Now, of course, it assumes the best credit. So if you pull credit and it's not as good for you, then that payment's going to be a little bit higher, of course. So just keep that in mind. But generally speaking, you don't have to have a full credit pull to see the final numbers. I don't quite know why they don't use that same calculator on the main page where you're just searching through different vehicles, because I feel like that would give you a more accurate number. But at least from a monthly payment standpoint, you will get that information shortly after completing the online reservation process. And for me, in my case, in my state of Utah, it obviously include taxes as well. So I wasn't sure if that was 800 plus taxes or 800 including taxes. It included taxes. So for what it's worth, it was accurate before having to get my credit pulled. Now, coming back to the residual value, the purchase price of the vehicle was $86,250. My residual value is 57.5%. So my residual in terms of value was $49,618.50. Now, to give you some more detail on the specific lease I chose, because you can do anywhere from like a 10,000 mile, you can go up to 15,000. Mine is a 3-year, 36,000 mile lease. So it's 12,000 miles a year. But you can kind of play around with those numbers, and from what I see, they're pretty accurate. Now, before I dive into the final loan documents where it breaks down my cost versus how much I'm paying out of pocket, which I do want to break down for you, I want to talk about some nuances or teething pains that occurred during this process up until I got my final loan documents. And that had to do with after I got the loan approval and I saw my $800.17 or 71 cents in the portal, I thought we were good to go. And I was ready to kind of go through the final stages, which was to provide insurance and then fly out to Colorado and take delivery. But all of a sudden I get a call the next day, and long story short, I can't remember all the details, but essentially they told me, oh, wait a minute, the numbers in your portal are wrong. You're actually going to pay more than that. And at first it kind of shocked me because I already mentally prepared for that number. I was not ready to pay more than that. And well, then they called me back later. Oh, never mind, you're in Utah. Okay, we're, that number is actually accurate. I think, again, it had to do with the tax component. Maybe they were thinking I was in Colorado, and so I had to pay a greater tax portion, so my due at signing would be higher. I don't know the specifics, but that is an example of, well, this is a startup. They don't know all the nuances of all the states like a legacy manufacturer with dealerships in the state. And also, if you guys weren't aware, I made this, I covered this topic in the video when I put my order in, but leasing had just opened up in Utah in July of 2024. So they were really brand new to this. But that was the first case where I was like, okay, first off, you freaked me out. And then second of all, okay, you probably should have known that before you told me that my numbers were wrong. The second thing that happened during that process is they wanted me to add insurance to the vehicle and upload verification of such, which makes sense, right? In my past experience when I've leased a vehicle, I can do it at the appointment. Not the appointment, it's when I'm buying the car. I can show them that I have, hey, here's my insurance, I've added it, we're good to go, I can drive off the lot. Rivian, because of, I guess, this direct-to-consumer model, they needed evidence of my insurance beforehand. So I uploaded them a declarations page, I believe, that showed that my Rivian would be active the day I was taking delivery. Well, that wasn't good enough for them. They needed it on the policy already, which I thought was odd because I've never leased a vehicle where I've had that vehicle on my insurance for like a couple days before I took delivery. It doesn't make any sense, but that's what they wanted. And I fought them a little bit on it, and then I ended up caving and doing it, I think, 1 day early. So the reason I fought them on it is not because of like the $7 a day I was paying, which really is kind of like, hey, that's $7 a day I can keep in my pocket. But it's really the fact that why am I insuring something that I don't have any possession of? It doesn't make sense to me. But they said that, if that insurance is delayed, then they can't make the loan documents, which would delay my process of picking up the car. And I was under a pretty tight timeline. I was planning on flying out the day I was taking delivery, flying out early in the morning, and then driving the vehicle back home that same day. Like, I was not planning on any overnight stays. I needed it to be very efficient, very quick. And so I was willing to pay an extra day or two of insurance to be able to guarantee that I would make it home that same day. So I did that. The second kind of teething or growing pain issue was they sent me the loan documents, which was funny. They actually ended up sending it to me before I uploaded my final proof of insurance. So it's like the left hand wasn't talking to the right. They were communicating the wrong thing to me, but whatever, I got it done. But when I got the loan documents, the date on the documents was, the lease agreement was a day or two early. I think it was a day early than I was actually taking delivery of it. So I pointed it out to them. I said, hey, the date is wrong. It's, I'm picking it up tomorrow. They said, oh yeah, that's true, but the date of the lease agreement has to be the date that it's produced. So we have to produce it today, and so that's why it's a day early. I said, well, that's great and all, but I'm not taking possession of the car today. I'm taking possession of the car tomorrow. So again, I'm paying an extra day, and I'm also going to have to return the car an extra day earlier than I would need to if it was done correctly in the first place. And it's about the principle of the matter, right? Like, if I don't have possession of the car, why am I paying for something? It's just throwing money down the toilet at that point. And I fought him on this, and this was an argument that I won on, and there's no winning or losing. It's just about right and wrong. And what ended up happening was they were trying to make an excuse that it would lead to delays and that, I wouldn't be able to leave maybe as early as I thought. But long story short, when I landed in Colorado that following morning, I saw the email come through with the correct date and the correct numbers. So it's not a seamless experience. You're going to have to push them a little bit on some things like money factor, like certain dates and certain things like that. Like, double check your documents, double check everything in the portal, because there's mistakes out there and there's nobody else that's going to be correcting them except for you. So now I want to go through the final numbers. How much was due at signing? How much did I actually have to pay out of pocket? And what is that all going towards in regards to my car? So I have the lease agreement here. I want to go over it and let's get right into it. Okay, I have the numbers here. Now, the cost of my car, the MSRP, was actually $85,250. That's what's on the Monroney. That's for a quad motor 2023 Gen 1 R1T with the adventure package and the all-terrain package. Mouthful, but that's kind of a fully equipped quad motor Gen 1 R1T. If you guys don't remember from the last video, I honestly think, anecdotally speaking, this is the very last Gen 1 quad motor that was for sale in 2024. I say that because I searched all over the US, various zip codes, and I talked about how I do that in the first video, and I couldn't find another quad motor. And that's exactly why I didn't want to wait to talk to somebody. I had to put my reservation or my non-refundable deposit down. I didn't want to lose out on this vehicle because the deal was just so good. So the MSRP was $85,250. You add the $1,800 destination fee. That's across the board on all Rivians, no matter where you live. But I was also getting a $2,600 lease credit, which was because I was getting an older model. It was a 2023. They were running out. They actually stopped producing Gen 1s at that point. They converted their factory to Gen 2, and they wanted to move inventory. So I got a lease credit. And so because of that, the gross cost of my car on the paperwork was $84,450. Now, the amount that was due at signing was $10,480.37. Now, you may be confused because I said I only put down a $500 deposit, right? So how does that number kind of tie out? Well, here's what it is. So that $10,480.37 consists of the capitalized cost reduction of $8,000, which I'll break down in just a minute. You have your first month payment, $800.71. You got a $6 initial title fee. You've got initial registration fee of $51. Sales and use tax of $61.41, acquisition fee of $895, dealer documentation fee of $347, a corridor fee of $10, hybrid electric vehicle fee of $140.75, miscellaneous license fee of $156.50, a plate fee of $7, and a tire fee of $5. Brings the grand total to $10,480.37. Now, half of these fees I honestly don't understand. I'm sure they're federally mandated. They might be state fees. I don't even know where that sales and use tax of $61 comes from. None of it makes sense. But generally the numbers tie out, okay? Now, how did my down payment or my money due at signing cover that $10,000? Well, here's how it is all calculated. So $7,500 of that $10,480.37 due at signing was covered by the EV tax credit. So that's the $7,500 tax credit that everybody's talking about. It might go away here with the big, beautiful bill. It might disappear, but for now, that's what that money is from. The remaining amount is $2,980.37, and that really comes up to those numbers I was telling you earlier, plus the $500 non-refundable deposit. So at signing, the amount that I paid was the first month's payment, the acquisition fee, the registration, the taxes, the title, $500 deposit. So my zero down payment was $2,980.37 due at signing. So that's how it translates. Technically $500 down payment, the rest goes to fees. So I really didn't walk away with zero money out of pocket. I had to pay nearly $3,000 for what was on the calculator as a 0% down payment. And that brings the grand total to $800.71 per month. Now, again, my residual value, according to this documentation, is $49,618.50. And so the grand total of all my payments, including the due at signing and all of my monthly payments, and the turn-in fee of about $500, totals $39,022 over the course of 3 years. Now, let's break down real quick as to why I think this is the best lease I've ever had. Typically, I run this back of the napkin calculation where if the MSRP is, say, $100,000, if I put 10% down, so I put down $10,000, the amount that I owe on the vehicle is then $90,000. If I owe 1% of that per month, so that being $900 a month, then I have a pretty decent lease. That's been my experience leasing a bunch of different cars over the years. I call it the 1% rule. I've heard it now talked about in other places, but I think I was one of the very first to talk about it, or at least I came to that realization as the same time that everybody else did, is 1% after a 10% down payment is a decent lease. Now, if I was to use my same rule where 10% due at signing, it should be 1% of the payment. If I use the MSRP of around $87,000 for this car, my payment at signing would have been around $8,700, and my monthly payment would be about $870 per month. My payment is only $800 a month, which is about 0.92%, and my down payment was about 3.4%, at roughly $3,000. So I would consider this a really good lease. Now, I caveat all of this, and this is why I leave it to the end of the video, is to say these leases don't exist anymore for this Rivian. They just don't. I just did a quick search of Rivians right now. You're lucky to get a dual motor standard battery pack for the same lease price that I got my quad motor R1T. Unfortunately, it's just how it is. And that's honestly why I decided to pull the trigger on a Gen 1, is because at the time Gen 2 was coming out, and I had a very sneaking suspicion that they would be much more expensive. In fact, I think there were a couple R1Ss on the website that I was able to look at, and they were already a couple $100 more than the Gen 1s. So I knew this was gonna happen. So that's why I pulled the trigger, and timing was great. Of course, the fact that I was able to find a one model year older one that was out there, that was new. So I got very lucky. But I also realized that Gen 1 leases were much better than Gen 2. In fact, I heard some people out there leasing a quad motor for like $500 a month with very minimal down payment. So for those of you out there that have that, you have an amazing deal. But I would say mine is pretty damn good as well. But again, those leases right now, they don't exist. A tri-motor is like $1,300 right now per month with 10% down payment. So it's a much different world right now for the Gen 2s, but I think eventually it might get back to that point. Give it a few years, take a look at when the R2 comes out. If the company becomes a little bit more profitable, they might start throwing some more money onto the leasing, and that might change. But I wanted to kind of give you a summary of the whole process. It's a very long video, I think it's very informative for the 10 of you out there that are really dying to have a video with this much detail. Last thing I'll leave off with is, how was the experience? Well, overall, it was okay. As you can tell, there was a little bit of fighting, or not fighting, more so just disagreements or trying to fish for information because it wasn't super transparent in the process. Yes, it's awesome that it's direct to consumer. You don't have to haggle, right? There's not really any haggling, although I have noticed you can still haggle on some of these things. But because there's no direct person face-to-face conversation, it's hard to get all the details you need to know. You have to talk to one person who's got to talk to a finance group, who's got to talk to somebody else, and the turnaround time for all of this is like 2 or 3 days. So to get a quick answer that you would get at a dealership, like a yes, no, this is the number, this isn't the number, it takes a couple days, and it takes talking to a few different people to get the right answer. And honestly, I don't think it's that much better than the dealership model. Dealership model, yes, a hassle. You got to haggle. You got to deal with them holding on to your keys because they're going to, they don't want you to leave and they want to value your trade-in. Yeah, that part sucks, but at least the numbers I get are quick. I know what they are. I can negotiate there, and that's the number. I don't have to wait for somebody to get me the details. It's hit or miss. It's kind of up to you as to whether you prefer one model over the other. Now, the reason I say you can haggle a little bit is earlier, before I was even considering a Rivian, I was looking at Lucid, and there were some calls I had with sales advisors there where they were kind of throwing cash on the hood, trying to incentivize things like a conquest offer, this and that. So there's ways to haggle a little bit with the direct-to-consumer model, but just not as flexible as a dealership model. That's just based on my anecdotal experience. But there you have it, folks. That was a very long video. Hopefully it was informative for you. Hopefully it was helpful. I think it would be for those of you that are really interested in leasing a vehicle, especially a Rivian, where there's really not that much information on the website. Long story short, the calculator is pretty accurate. There's a little bit of nuances where the down payment appears a little bit lower on the calculator online, whereas the monthly payment is pretty damn accurate. It's in the ballpark. I mean, give or take 40 bucks a month, you're probably in the ballpark of what it looks like. So there you have it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. If you did, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. There's gonna be more videos. I will be doing my full 1 year update on my Rivian. A lot to talk about, things I love, things I really don't like, and you know, my overall thoughts on the vehicle. So stay tuned for that. That video will be coming out probably in the next month or so. And check me out on all the social media, same as the YouTube channel name. So next time, everybody, I hope you stay schwazy. It's a throwback to my old channel name. Stay healthy. Have a wonderful day. See you later.